Everybody should have their voice. You hear a lot of people say, we're here to give them a voice. We're not here to give them a voice. We're here to give them their voice.
My school could not teach me because they didn't know how smart I was.
Before 1975, access to an appropriate education was denied for all disabled children. Thousands of disabled children were put into state institutions.
Particularly students who had more significant disabilities and physical disabilities, intellectual or cognitive disabilities, they were sent away to institutions. And these institutions were just horrendous conditions. They were very large. They were usually set on the outskirts of cities. This whole idea of out of sight.
And my mother was told by her doctor, as all parents in those days of whatever the disability was, were told that by staying in their home, I would destroy my family's home, that my mom and dad would wind up getting divorced, and that the doctors strongly encouraged her to send me to the state institution because you don't want to have a disabled child in your house, you can't control them. 60 some odd years ago, these kids didn't even go to school. We didn't have anyone who knew how to work with this population, so they sent people in there who just had visual impairments or who were deaf, who may have been in a wheelchair and totally cognitively fine and brains fine, but because their doctors said the same thing to their parents, they were sent to the state institution. And because there were so many people there, a lot of the clients were not clothed, covered in their own feces and excrement, and they just weren't being cleaned. There was a lot of inappropriate touching, sexual things occurring between staff and the clients because there was no rules in those days. It was just like, you're disabled, we don't want to see you.
Schools only educated approximately 1/5 of disabled students. Several states prohibited special education in regular schools for disabled children. In fact, disabled children were firmly excluded from schools under the laws that were adopted. By the early 20th century, state legislatures created public, segregated institutions to house the disabled.
One of the first cases was called Park, and another was called Mills, and these were on the East Coast. And what happened was that these parents won the right for their children to go to public school. And the Park case, what it is called a class action lawsuit, similar to Brown, so meaning that what it was for these students was these students had what was called at the time mental retardation. I called it an intellectual disability. So there were around at least 13 students who had a mental retardation who were being told that no, we can't teach you, you have a disability, you don't belong in public school, you need to go to this institution or this separate school. And what happened was they won, so that means that across the country, all kids who have that same label, all kids with mental retardation they now have the right to go to school.
In 1975, Congress enacted the All Handicapped Children's Education Act, also known as Public Law 94-142. This act granted a free, appropriate public education for all children with disabilities in a least restrictive environment. The public law protected the rights of children and enhanced how disabled children were recognized and educated by designing linked services to meet their own unique needs.
In 1990, the law was reauthorized as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA. It was signed by President George H.W. Bush. It reaffirmed the right for a free public education for children with disabilities and strengthened the law's commitment to better inclusion in schools.
And so what happened is two things. First, Brown versus Board of Education happened. So we could no longer have separate was not equal, that we had to have integration happening along racial lines. And so this opened the doors for, separate isn't equal either for people with disabilities. So that happened, along with all of these institutions were exposed. So what I mean is people didn't really know that this was happening. And so professors, news reporters, physicians, they did these exposés and they showed the world what was happening and raised awareness, and parents started raising awareness, and they started these legal battles to get institutions closed and to get their kids to be able to go to school.
The 1990s amendments also provided federal research and sponsors, which include initiatives for transition services.
The transition services in IDEA are one of its most important components. This provision requires all who are working with disabled children to focus on improving academic and functional achievement for the child.
The 1997 amendments to IDEA continued to focus on access, which meant that they not only strengthened physical access to school, but strengthened the general education curriculum, leading to higher academic expectations and greater outcomes for students with disabilities.
And I went to school for the deaf, which was in Brooklyn, where they taught me to talk. It took me about 20 years of speech therapy.
Without my hearing aids, I have no internal sound, and this is how I sounded as a child.
Under IDEA, state governments are responsible to provide enough assistance for schools and parents and make sure that the personnel are highly qualified to meet the expectations for children with disabilities. It requires parents to be involved in an integral part of the team in making educational decisions for their child. They need to understand the needs of their child, provide follow-up support for the educational programs, obtain information about special services, understand the provisions of IDEA, and attend the child's IEP.
We try to, at the Bridge School, we have individuals who have expertise in all the different disciplines that our students require. So our kids have severe physical disabilities as well as complex communication needs. So we have expertise in communication strategies and different technologies to assist our students. Well, we have responsibilities to the students and their IEPs. We are part of a team with the family, with the student, and with all the other speech pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, assistive technology.
There are two types of intervention we give, and you'll see this in the IEP. One is called an accommodation, the other is a modification. An accommodation, sometimes, like you talked about someone breaking their leg, they wouldn't go on an IEP because it's not a lifelong disability. It's something that we can provide an accommodation for. So they might need 5 minutes extra to get from class to class. They might need to use an elevator in the building if, those are called accommodations. And we do that in what's called the 504 plan. And that's part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973.
In 2004, IDEA amendments increased state and local accountability for educating disabled children. From this, IDEA mandates students with disabilities be included in all state accountability programs. The 2004 amendments made sure that the personnel was highly qualified and expanded ways for identifying children with disabilities.
IDEA is not fully funded. Congress set a maximum target for the federal contribution in order to spread education, spending equal to 40% of the estimated excess cost of educating children with disabilities. There are several minimum and maximum grant restrictions which causes an issue for IDEA to fully fund education. Raising special education spending is primarily the result of an expansion of the student population identified as disabled and less the result of disproportionate increases in the cost of special education.
95% of students with disabilities are being educated in local neighborhood schools, and almost 6 million students with disabilities are educated in general education. IDEA has demonstrated great achievements for disabled children receiving Part C and B of IDEA. Graduation rates for students with disabilities receiving a diploma increased 43%. Enrollment rates for 2-year or 4-year colleges has doubled. Students with disabilities hold jobs after leaving high school. IDEA is still achieving academic goals and success in an environment that is full of heightened expectations.
I have a PhD, I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor of neuropsychology, and I'm a director of special education for a fairly large school district, as well as pupil personnel. So if my mother hadn't been, strong woman, hear me roar, I would have been sent to a state institution too. And so I think it really shows us that all children need to be given an opportunity and a chance, and luckily we have changed.
But these places and these places